I feel funny talking to you about what I'm about to talk to you about because I have a feeling if there is any collection of people on earth that doesn't need to hear what I'm about to say, it's the people in this room. But Jacqueline assured me that a pep talk wouldn't be such a bad thing, so I'm going to tell you what you all already know and try to affirm for you that what you're trying to do is exactly what has to be done. How did we respond to the almost complete financial collapse of the industrial world? How do we respond when we discover that our schools are failing our children? And how do we respond when we discover that healthcare costs are just escalating beyond all reason? These are three problems that developed societies face, and they've been dramatically manifested in recent years, and the response, the suggested response in all three cases is the same. You want to fix the financial system, you have to do two things. First, you have to develop more rules. You have to stick it to the bankers and make sure they can't do the irresponsible things that they did. Sticks that we can shake at the bankers. And second, we need to come up with smarter incentives. If we can't force people to do the right thing, then if we're clever enough, we can make it so that they do well themselves by doing well for other people. Rules and incentives, sticks and carrots. And in response to the financial crisis, you heard a lot about those two things and absolutely nothing about anything else. What else is there? Well, the point of the book I wrote with my colleague Ken Sharp is that there is something else, and that something else is much more important and much more effective than either rules or incentives, and that something else is what Aristotle called character. Well, actually, Aristotle called it virtue. What we need is to figure out a way to encourage people to do the right thing, not because they have to, and not because we're bribing them to, but precisely because it is the right thing. How do we get people to do the right thing because it's the right thing? From everything I know about Acumen, this attitude, a collection of people who are doing the right thing because it's the right thing, characterizes virtually everyone who's got any association with Acumen, and that's why I'm not sure why I'm talking to you. So I'm not going to tell you what you already know. What I'm here to do is to make sure that you celebrate yourself and your colleagues and make sure that you do all that you can to enable the people who work with you and for you also to do the right thing because it's the right thing. Rules and incentives have their place, but they will never get us what we want and what we need. What rules are and incentives are their insurance policies against disaster, but they are virtual guarantees of mediocrity. And we have seen that played out again and again as we try to fix broken institutions with nothing in our tool bag except for rules and incentives. So Aristotle is the person who wrote about the importance of character, the importance of virtue, and he had one particular virtue that he thought was the most important. He called it practical wisdom. Practical wisdom is the will to do the right thing, the desire, the internal motivation to do the right thing, and the skill to figure out what the right thing is. The world we live in is complicated. Its contexts change everything. There's no formulaic way to solve any significant problem, so you need to have the judgment and the flexibility to figure out how to design healthcare systems in this place rather than merely cookie-cutter importing healthcare institutions that worked over there and assuming that they're going to work everywhere. So what practical wisdom entails is, first of all, the ability to appreciate that there are exceptions to every rule. Every case is in important respects different. It is the ability to improvise. Ken and I sometimes talk about wisdom as a kind of moral jazz, Jazz musicians, most of them read music, and they can play the notes on the page. But what makes jazz is not playing the notes on the page, which are kind of like rules. It is improvising around the notes on the page. And because of the complexity and variability of the situations people find themselves in, they have to be able to improvise novel solutions to novel problems. Wise people can do this. Wise people have the ability to empathize. We just heard about the role that empathy plays in the construction of medical institutions to serve an unserved population. They have to be able to empathize with the people they serve. They have to be able to take the perspective of the people they serve. And it seems to me, from what little I've read in efforts to do development work, is that this characteristically is absent from people who try to fix the world. They assume the perspective they have is the perspective that any sensible person would have, and then they just run roughshod over important social and cultural institutions and are completely perplexed at that their incredibly clever interventions fail to produce the desired result. We need to understand what the world looks like to the people we are trying to help. We also have to know how to choose among virtuous actions, among good things, when they conflict. We spend a lot of time trying to teach our kids the difference between right and wrong. That, it turns out, is really easy. Kids probably mostly know the difference between right and wrong by the time they're 4. What's really hard is to teach people how to choose between right and right. And often we find ourselves in situations where, on the one hand, we want to be honest with people. On the other hand, we want to be kind to people. We can't simultaneously be honest and kind, and we have to decide which of these two virtues, both of them admirable, this particular situation calls for. So wisdom includes these characteristics. These are the skills, the moral skills that enable people to use wise judgment. And you can't teach people to be wise in a classroom. I teach a class on wisdom, and I'm pretty sure that the students in it finish the class no wiser than they started it. We don't aspire to make them wise. What we try to do is get them to appreciate why it's important to try to be wise. But the way you become wise is by actually trying and failing and learning from your mistakes and trying again. You learn to be wise by having mentors who guide you in the right direction. Mentors who are willing to allow you to take initiatives and make mistakes and learn from your mistakes. Wisdom comes from experience, and not just any experience. Mark Twain once said, there are people who've had 30 years of experience, and then there are people who've had the same experience for 30 years. If you operate in a rigid, bureaucratic structure where you are doing the same thing every day, you will be no wiser after 30 years of doing it as you were the day you started. So for people who supervise, it takes an enormous amount of commitment and courage to let go of the control you're inclined to want to exert and let the people you're supervising do things on their own. Learn by their own experiments, learn from their own mistakes. Now, if you're a cardiac surgeon, I'm not recommending that the first time a surgical resident shows up in the operating room, you just hand them a scalpel and have a good time. I hope the patient lives. So you want to protect against catastrophic mistakes, but you have to be willing to let people make modest mistakes and take their own initiative and learn. So this cultivating wisdom is a way to get the kind of care, concern, and service to other people that Acumen aspires to, and that many of us aspire to even outside of Acumen. Rules and incentives will never succeed in doing that. And it's worse even than that. Rules and incentives actually undermine our efforts to develop wisdom. And here's why. The more you rely on rules, the more you tell people what to do, the less opportunity they have to use their judgment, use their initiative, improvise, and come up with novel solutions to novel problems. Increasingly in the school systems in the United States, in inner cities, teachers are given scripts. to follow, 7,500 item scripts to teach 25-page picture books to kindergarten kids, and you just go through the script. Why do they do this? Why do the administrators do this? Because they don't trust that if the teachers are left to their own devices, they'll figure out how to teach kindergarten kids. And so you give them a bulletproof curriculum. And the result, of course, is they may not know how to do it their first day in class, but they're also not going to know how to do it their 500th day in class. And the result is that wise teachers leave teaching. You are left only with teachers who find it acceptable to be doing nothing but script following 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. The more we rely on rules, the less we can count on nurturing good judgment. And incentives undermine the will to do the right thing. If you incentivize good performance, then people do what they do to get the incentive rather than because it's the right thing. I'll just describe one little demonstration of this where a daycare center in Israel had parents coming late to pick up their kids, and they just kept coming 10 minutes late, 15 minutes late, and the director was going nuts, so he took economics in college, so he introduced an incentive system. If you come late, you pay a fine, $15, parking ticket-sized fine. And you know what happened when he introduced the fine? What do you think happened to the frequency of lateness? Lateness went up. It approximately doubled. Why? Because it was a good deal. It was worth the price. Another 15 minutes in the office for a mere 15 bucks, and the result, so after months of this failure, he took the fines away because they didn't work. And now what do you think happened to lateness? It went up even more. So what happened when he introduced the fines is that he demoralized showing up on time to pick up your kids. That is to say, he took the moral dimension out of it. Now the only reason to show up was because of the incentive structure that had been imposed, and when the incentive structure was taken away, there was no longer any reason to I'm amazed that the parents ever came. So incentives undermine the will to do the right thing. Excessive rules undermine the skill to do the right thing. And the result is that you have a kind of downward spiral, because the less we trust the wisdom of people, the more we resort to rules and incentives. And the more we resort to rules and incentives, the less wise people become. And the less wise people become, the less we trust their wisdom, the more we rely on rules and incentives, and before you know it, we have absolutely driven all wisdom from the scene, and we're stuck with, at best, a mediocre, limp-along, no one is satisfied with its system of providing financial, educational, medical, and legal services to the population. Okay, so how do you actually nurture wisdom? This is a long story. I'm going to give you the short version of it, the comic book version of it. Most important thing to do is to keep the purpose, the telos, Aristotle would call it, of the activity front and center, and make sure it is embodied in the day-to-day practices of the people who engage in the activity, not just in the once-a-year speeches given by Jacqueline, but in the day-to-day activities of everybody engaged in providing health care, clean water, financing of small businesses, and what have you. It has to be front of mind. You have to be able to know as you start each workday why you're doing it. It has to be modeled by everybody in the organization. The people who supervise you have to model it, have to embody it in their actions and not just in the speeches that they give. And the result is that it becomes automatic, second nature, in your own way of understanding what you do and why you do it. We have to identify and celebrate people that you might call moral heroes. And the sense I get is part of why we're gathered here, you're all gathered here today, is to see some moral heroism in action. There's a book that many of you probably know called To Kill a Mockingbird, about this incredibly courageous lawyer in the South defending a falsely accused black man. It's a book that kids read in 6th grade, 5th grade, 7th grade, and I'm pretty sure that no teenager says, I want to be a lawyer when I grow up so I can do mergers and acquisitions. No, if they want to be lawyers, they want to be Atticus Finch. They want to be the lawyer hero of To Kill a Mockingbird. They want to pursue justice. And their notion is the way to pursue justice is by becoming a lawyer. We shouldn't be embarrassed about such moral heroes. We should identify them. We should put them on a pedestal. We should aspire to be like them, and we should celebrate them. And by doing that, you're providing people essentially with examples of what it means to engage in whatever practice they're engaged in for the right reasons and in the right way. There are a couple of examples of this in action. I'll just mention them to you, and then I'll finish. The first was a talk I actually heard at TED 4 years ago by a guy named Ray Anderson, who had a carpet tile company. It made these squares of disgusting, ugly carpet that you see in every airport in the United States. It had, I wouldn't say a zero footprint. It had the footprint of an elephant. It was environmentally as unfriendly as could be. He made zillions of dollars, and then he had this epiphany. He had all the money he'd ever need. He was going to leave piles of it to his grandchildren, and the only trouble was he wasn't going to leave his grandchildren a world to live in because of pollution. So he decided to turn on a dime and devote all of Interface's energy to moving to zero footprint production of carpet. And he figured he'd lose a fortune, but it didn't matter that he was going to lose a fortune. He was going to gain the earth. And that was his mission for the last years of his life. And the astonishing thing was that profits at Interface went up. And the reason that profits at Interface went up is that the workforce was so motivated that you simply couldn't keep them down. They were not simply making carpet for a wage. They were now working to save the planet. They were full of ideas about how to do it. They were incredibly dedicated, incredibly diligent, incredibly mindful of quality control, and the result was enormous enhancement of productivity because there was a telos, there was a mission that they could be proud of. Don't take it for granted that people know what the mission is. Remind them of it all the time. One last example, a colleague of mine named Adam Grant did this. There's a lot of people, undergraduates get paid to solicit contributions from alums. They make phone calls. Have any of you ever gotten one of these phone calls? You've just spent $250,000 on college. You're now spending another $250,000 on your kid, and you get a call asking whether you'd like to give just a little bit more. Well, you know, people don't, they hang up before the call is over. They listen politely, but they say, no, just can't do it now. Nobody contributes. So this is a terrible job. Morale is awful. They don't make a lot of calls in an hour. They get almost no success. It's just, I don't even know why they go through the motions. So my colleague Adam Grant took these phone solicitors, sat them in a room, and played them a 10-minute videotape of a student at the institution who had gone there thanks to a scholarship that was made possible by the very solicitations that these students were making. And he just said how his life had been completely changed by the opportunity to study at a first-rate institution like this. It would never have been possible without the scholarship. The scholarship would never have been possible without the generosity of alums, and he was going to be grateful and try to pay it back for the rest of his life. That was it. And then they went back to calling alums. They called twice as many people per hour, and they got 2.5 times as many contributions per hour as they had without watching that videotape. So if you make sure people know why, they will probably supply the energy themselves. If you take the why for granted, they won't. And if you can't come up with a good answer to the question why, then you have nothing to fall back on except for rules and incentives. Last point. People want to be happy in life. Better to be happy than have a stick in the eye. What research on happiness tells us is that the two main determinants of happiness are work, meaningful and engaging work, and close relations with other people. What Ken and I came to believe is that the essential ingredient in both engaging and meaningful work and successful close relations with other people is practical wisdom. If you are a wise person, your work will go better, If you are a wise person, your relations to friends and family will go better, and the result is that you'll be a happier person. So you can imagine a positive feedback loop where the happier people are, the better they work, the better their social relations get, the happier they become, and the cycle continues on and on and on, improving both the people who are getting served by you all in the room and improving the lives of the people who are doing the serving. So wisdom is in the interest of the people who are displaying it, just as it's in the interest of the people who are receiving it. Thank you very much.